What is up, guys? So, I really wanted to do a talk on, the principles behind why the programming and stuff is the way it is. Now, there's some of you guys who are doing like the starting strength NLP. There's quite a few you guys into more like of an intermediate approach and some advanced stuff. So, there's a broad spectrum of training advancement that you guys are in. But the principles kind of remain the same throughout it. And over the last kind of over the last check-ins, so the last couple weeks, a lot of questions were raised on like why the programming is the way it is and why I'm having you guys making X change and stuff, and comparing it to the blue book and all of that stuff. So I really wanted to put together a bit of a training. Again, it's very simple on some of the basic principles behind why the program looks the way it is for you and why the changes are being made. So let's go ahead and dive into this and talk a little bit more. So let's just discuss what I consider first principles. Now, this is not necessarily my idea. In fact, this makes up the fundamental background for the starting strength program. And not a lot of people actually have a basic set of principles that they follow when it comes to their training. Most people just kind of do like what their favorite bodybuilder does, or like their favorite influencer, or what some of you like older guys like that used the Flex magazine and stuff back in the day. None of that really was like all that principle based. It was just kind of like, whatever the biggest guy in the gym is doing, like that's what I'm going to do. Right. So I think that we can all agree on these first two principles because they make up everything else that we're doing. That's an explanation for why we're doing everything else. And number one is that strength is important. It's the foundation. It improves every single physical quality that you have. In fact, there's like a list of 10 general physical skills that you have. Okay, so that's how strength is expressed. Power, speed, agility, endurance, stamina, explosiveness. There's 10 of them. I can't name them all off on my head. But as you get stronger, those things improve just by getting generally stronger. Whereas if you just train for one of those, like you just train for agility, you're not going to get any stronger. Okay, so these are the derivatives of strength. And then there's the ways that it's also expressed physically. So through more muscle mass, more bone density, more metabolic control, things like that. Okay, so we build our strength first because it carries over into everything else we do, right? And we acknowledge that as lifters that the strength is important. Okay, now the second thing is when it comes to building strength, our next principle is that we want to get strong efficiently. So that makes up the aspects of why we do the lifts the way we do. So we want to use lifts that helps us move the most weight because we've defined strength as force production, and you need to be lifting a lot of weight to produce more force through the longest effective range of motion, using the most available muscle mass. And that's kind of how we've settled upon these movement patterns: the squats, the bench, the press, the deadlift, the chin up, the row. Those are just big compound movements that use a ton of muscle mass and you can load heavily. Okay. And that's how we train efficiently. And then we tie in the principles of anatomy, physiology, physics, those things that make up why we're doing the lifts exactly the way we're doing them. Right. And the programming is going to be grounded in that. So we're using all of those principles to come up with this programming. And then another one is the stress-recovery-adaptation cycle. So acknowledging things like the Novice effect and how strength comes from the training is the stressor, and you have to recover from it. And then as you advance, that cycle needs to get longer and you have to do more to stress yourself. Okay. So our program is built off of all of those. And really, regardless of where you at in your training advancement, it's built off of these things. Okay. So, The main philosophy here that I take is, number one, because we want to be efficient, we got to get strong fast. We need something that's really simple. Okay. So you'll notice a lot of guys that I work with, or a lot of you guys have maybe been doing more complex programming. And then when you sign up, give me your credit card, and I set up your program for you, all of a sudden you're looking at it like, shit, I went from training 6 days a week with a bunch of exercises, and now Sam just has me doing 3 or 4 days a week with 3, maybe 4 exercises per lift. How does that make sense? It's because we're going to get good, and we're going to, with a very simple program, and progress up from there. Okay. Now, when it comes to that, and when it comes to progressing your training, you're going to see us make the least amount of changes to your programming possible. I have like this meme where it's like, hey, my program is the same as it was last week. You know, you just added a few pounds. What gives? Like, how am I going to progress like this? And it's like, no, that's exactly, we're going to keep doing this until you get strong. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we're not going to as we make changes and we continue to progress you, we're not going to overhaul you anytime, something slows down or maybe you miss a rep, right? So we're just going to make those small little changes to keep pushing the adaptation we want, which is strength. Okay. Another programming thing here for me is form is one of the most important things. And it's very much less like a safety thing for most people. It's not even about safety for most people. Because you see people lifting all over the country in gyms with horrible form and they're never hurt, right? But good form allows you to lift more weight safely over a broad population. Like if you have good form, you can lift a bunch of weight safely. That, you can just go ahead and say that. But is bad form actually causing all that many injuries? Probably not. But the stronger you are, the more ability you have to kind of tear something up, right? But think about it like this. If you have good, efficient form, you can lift more weight, which means that you can apply more stress to yourself. And when you apply more stress to yourself, you recover from it and you grow stronger. So by not having efficient form, it means you can't lift quite as much weight, which means that you don't stress yourself as much as you could, which means you don't recover as much as you could, which means you don't get as strong as you could. So form needs to be tied directly into your strength results. It's not a safety thing or an injury prevention thing. It is a pure fucking performance thing, having good form. And I'm not saying it has to be perfect, right? Your form doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, me and one of my colleagues were on the X timeline, and we were like, form can't get in the way of you making progress, but on either direction. So like if you're always working on your form and keeping it light, and trying to have perfect form, you're never going to progress. But if you have a horrible form, then it's going to be an issue too. So my take is, let's get you to 90% good form. And that extra 10%, maybe even 5 to 10%, can make up for individual differences. Like some people their knees are going to cave in a little bit on their squats. Their deadlift, their back's going to get a little bit round. Like that stuff just happens, right? But you can still make a ton of progress, and you're not going to get in the way of making that progress on either direction. Okay. So think about it. It's tied directly to your performance. Get it to 90% and start pushing. Okay. And then the next philosophy here is consistency is going to beat complexity. If you have good form and you have consistency and you train for 1 to 2 years and you get after it, you're going to make a ton of progress. Okay. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It's 3 to 4 consistent sessions per week with anywhere from 2 to 4 exercises per session. You make sure you recover, and you make sure you eat a bunch of protein, and you keep things really simple, and you bleed that out over the course of 5 years. You're going to get so freaking strong, and your life is going to be so much different than it was if you didn't. Just keep it simple, right? So as when it comes to like actually progressing your individual lifts, I know a lot of you guys have talked to you guys about this before in the past, but number one, you have to remember, especially if you're on the NLP, maybe less so if you're on a little bit more like periodized intermediate plan, But each lift is going to move at its own pace. Okay. A lot of people think, oh, I've stalled on my bench presses. That means I'm an intermediate. Now I need to move my whole plan to intermediate. And that's not the case. Right. So again, just because your press stalls in your initial program doesn't mean that you have to change your squats. You can do what you need to do to, keep pushing the stress on the press, which will often mean like less reps, more weight, and more volume or things of that, maybe more frequency, things of that nature. But your squats can still be on the NLP, and that is perfectly okay. It's not going to be a perfect plan where you like hit the standards with your NLP and then you can move on to intermediate training. The most likely thing that's going to happen is like you're going to hit the standards with your press, you're going to hit it with your squat, but your deadlift and your bench is going to lag behind. So you don't want to switch your training up as soon as you hit a stall point, or you hit like some imaginary number in your head where you decide that you're no longer an intermediate. I've literally had people like hit a 405 deadlift and they did 5-pound jumps up until that 405. And the next choice is 410 the next week for 5. But they think that because, oh, I hit 405, I'm intermediate, I need to change my program. Then they go into this periodization thing and they slow their progress down, right? So know that we're going to manage each lift on an individual case-by-case basis for a long time until you do get into a stage where you can start periodizing the whole program, and you have to really start taking that into account. But for most of us, like novice into the early intermediate training, we're going to be thinking about these lifts independently from another. So like from a programming perspective, you're looking at it and I have like, oh, I didn't like the way that your benches moved on Friday, so I make you repeat the weight instead of moving up. But I like the way your squats move, so I'm going to move your squats up for next time. And don't be surprised at that change, and don't get emotional about it either. There's no reason to, right? It's all about pushing the progress up over time. So again, we're going to use really small jumps with and we want a long runway. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people taking their NLP too fast, too soon. And then guys getting into intermediate, like periodized training, and they start their weights too heavy on those and they crash out, right? So we're going to be looking to add 5 pounds to your squats and your pulls. We will get into 2.5 and 1 pound jumps to your presses very, very soon. It's so much better to be taking slow weekly or every other session 1 pound jumps. You think about a 1 pound jump twice a week for 3 weeks. That's a 5 pound jump in 3 weeks. It would be more like 2.5 too. And man, a lot of advanced lifters, if they could get a 5 pound PR with 3 weeks of training, they would love it. But a lot of people will like be like, oh, lifting 1 pound more than last week, that's for pussies. Like I'm just going to do I'm just going to do the 5 pound jump. And then you stall and you wonder why. Okay. So on those presses, I'm not afraid to move you to 2.5 1 pound jumps very, very soon. Okay. That keeps the progress going for a long time and allows you to accumulate the adaptation over time versus just running you into a wall, working back and resetting and trying to break past it. You can just go one little pound of progress at a time. If you added 1 pound to a lift per week for 52 weeks in a year, you'd gain 50 pounds on your lifts, which is a shit ton of progress. And you can sustain that for a long time on those presses and stuff. And a lot of people don't make the progress. I've been there. Like I have literally been there where I'm trying to take too big of jumps on my bench and my presses and I'm wondering why it's not going. But I've also been on the other side of it where I've taken 1 pound jump, 1 pound jump, 1 pound jump, 1 pound jump. And I've had tons of clients where I've fucked their programming up and I've had them do sets of 5 and I've had them do, run up into a wall. Sometimes I still do it, right? Instead, we could have taken smaller jumps. Like, I have a really good case of a guy in the gym who did 1 pound jumps on his presses from about 180 pounds all the way up to like a 212 pound press. 1 pound jump a week, baby. We made it, kept going. He kept getting the reps every single time because we didn't go too far, right? And then these volume intensity things, these are the tools to continue applying the appropriate amount of stress that you can recover from. So we add things like top sets, light days, backoffs when you can no longer do 3x5 or whatever it is. We're going to shift the structure of everything, but we want to keep the intensity high to maintain the stress. Okay. So let's just talk about, like, from a lift by lift basis, some of the ways that we're going to spread the stress. This was a lot of common questions like, oh, I'm wondering about my presses. I'm wondering about my squats. Like, what approaches are we going to take from a programming perspective? So with the presses, like mostly the overhead press, we have to bully them along. Okay. So the 3x5 on a press, just because there's less muscle mass involved and you're going to run it out pretty soon. Okay. So we do a thing where we just want to get 15 total reps. That's like number one for men, where so let's say you get to 135 and you had just done 132.5 and you do 135. Maybe sometimes I'll just switch people to this before I do any 1 pound jumps. I'll wait until we get into like heavy singles for 1 pound jumps. But all of a sudden you did 132.5, 135 this time, you all of a sudden get 5, 4, 3. So instead of just stopping right there, we want to get all 15 reps so we get all the stress. Okay. So you just continue and get the 15 reps. So it would look like 5, 4, 3. That's 11. 5, 4, 9 plus 3. No, 12. And then 3 more, you get 3 more reps. Bang. You knock them out. Okay. And after that goes for a while, you're going to run into a spot where you're like looking at like a 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. In which case we'll switch to like some triples and we'll just go like triples across and run those up for a little bit. And then once the triples don't work anymore and you start missing reps, you can start doing heavy singles. So anywhere from 5 to 10 heavy singles works really, really well. Okay. And again, it's all in adding intensity to the bar, adding weight to the bar to continue stressing yourself really hard. Okay. And then once you start increasing frequency and maybe pressing twice a week with an upper lower split or however you have it, things like independent sets on volume day is awesome. So you set 3 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 5 at X weight. And then if you say you get the first 2 for 5 and then the next one you get for 4 and the next one you get for 3, well, the next week you try to move the first 2 sets up in poundage, and then the last 2 sets you work the weight back a little bit. Okay. And that's called an independent set structure that I use a lot on like volume days for people. Okay. With the presses too, like expectation management, one of the guys on a check-in call asked me, like, is it normal for me to fail on presses? Yes. If you're not failing reps, or if there isn't a failure every now and again on those, you're probably not pushing it with enough intensity. Okay. So if you're always gravy on your presses, you're probably not pushing it as hard as you need to. And then obviously with the presses, micro loading is a huge key. 2.5 pound, 1 pound jumps. Doesn't really, you could go less than that. Like you could do 1/2 pound jumps at a time if you wanted, but a lot of people don't have the equipment that's like precise enough for that really to make all that difference. So, if you're at a commercial gym, you never know what those fucking weights weigh, right? Now for squats and pulls, instead of bullying, we're going to take a little bit more of a gradual, like hand-holded approach. So one of the first things that we do is get a light day in there early on squats specifically. If you're squatting 3 times a week, 3x5, that kind of gets to a point where like Friday's session is super hard. I'll go ahead and put a light day in the next day and it's just fine. Okay. You have to do that to spread the stress out. And man, it literally will give you another like 3 or 4 weeks of progress just by putting a light day in there without changing anything else. So again, one small change. And then once the light day starts working on those heavier days, we start doing top sets and backoffs. So it's too stressful for you to hit 3 sets of 5 across 2 times a week. So you start adding in a top set, 1 heavy set of 5, and some backoffs at 90% or 85% maybe. And then you look to progress that top set of 5. And then you get into more of a heavy, light, medium structure where 1 is a heavy set of 5 backoffs. So that's your overload event for the week. And then you have the 2 backoffs. And then you have your light squat day. And then you have like an 80% 3x5 squat day on Friday. And you run that out for a while. And then once that gets to the point where you can't recover, you can start doing triples on that heavy day. You can maybe even do just an intensity day like Texas method on the back end of the week. But again, we're just spreading the stress out. Okay. And then things like rep cycling, where you're doing different rep ranges weekly. Think like 5-3-1 is a really good way of describing that. They can do waves, periodization. So you do 3 or 4 weeks of trying to progress a set of 5. And then the next 3 weeks, you try and progress your sets of 3. starting at a lower percentage and working up, and then, ones or however it is that you want to do it. Those are options to work in there, again, to spread the stress. You're strong enough. Since you're strong, you can stress yourself. So you have to accumulate that stress over a longer period of time for you to recover from, right? And on those squats and pulls, like, we want to push harder, but we want to avoid like failing a ton of reps on these a lot. You don't want to go like 3-4 weeks in a row of getting buried on a squat. I understand like once, maybe twice, or, like one every, you miss a last rep every now and again, but you definitely don't want to like make that a habit. Okay. And then things like deadlifts. Obviously, if you're in the NLP, you deadlift 3 times a week. That is one of the first things I do. A lot of people don't read past that point in the book where it's like, hey, 3 sets. 3 days a week of deadlifting, that is supposed to only last like a couple weeks. You take some big jumps while you're getting used to the form, and then it goes to every other day because you introduce a power clean or a light pull slot to spread the stress. And then it's every 3rd day, right? And then depending on how far you take the NLP, you can get to every 5th day. A lot of people at that point have transitioned to like a more intermediate training plan for sustainability, adaptability at that point. Okay. And then, another thing here when it comes to accessory work, I think about them not necessarily so much in the hypertrophy of it. So it's like, oh, I need to do more arm work because I want bigger arms. Well, it's like, you know what? Eating a lot of food and getting really fucking strong is going to get you bigger arms, right? No amount of like 2 or 3 sets of biceps at the end of your training session. Yeah, it's going to help, but it's mostly about pushing up those big lifts, eating so you can gain muscular body weight, and that's going to be what gives you bigger arms, right? So when we look to add supplemental or accessory lifts, we're doing it to spread out the stress. A good example is the NLP, is like adding in power cleans and lat pull downs or chin ups. Like, that is a light pulling motion that spreads the stress out, but still gets you good work. It spreads the stress out because, one, the deadlift is lighter than the power clean is lighter. Okay. The power clean is lighter than the deadlift, so it's less stressful. The chin up uses less muscle mass and it's lighter, so it's less stressful, but both of them are serving a purpose. You are expressing your strength quickly in the power clean while also getting some pulling practice, and you're using, quite a bit of muscle mass to pull your body weight, or maybe a little bit more on the chin up, but it's less stressful, systematically stressful. So there's good reasons to put those in there. Things like LTEs, lying tricep extensions, those work the tricep, the back of the arm. It makes up 70% of the arm, works them through both of their functions, and you can load a bunch of weight on them. You get them strong that way. So again, it's like those things, it's more compoundy versus isolation, like a one arm push down that has merit later on in your training. But when you're newer, like intermediate, novice, you want to still maintain that principle of most muscle mass, longest range of motion, most effective weight. Okay. And then, there's other ways to do this, like by lifting heavier weights with less range of motion to still to kind of not stress yourself quite as much. So a good example of this is like heavy rack pulls. One of the common things is like you run your deadlifts out like as long as you possibly can on the NLP intermediate training, and then you just switch to some below the shin rack pulls, and you run those out just like an NLP, get them progressively heavier, and then you can cycle back to the normal deadlift at some point, and maybe even start like cycling rack pulls and deadlifts, maybe even halting deadlifts. Halting deadlifts are another good example of, you can lift pretty heavy weights, but because you stop above the knee, you miss out on that top portion of the lift, which means less stress, but you can still handle heavy loads with it. Press is a good example of this, is like a pin overhead press or a pin bench press. You can handle heavy loads, but it's less range of motion, less stress. So it's a great way of spreading things out. And then once you've kind of gone through this process, then you can start bringing up weak points. Everybody has some sort of weak point. A lot of us, we lift because like we want to perform better in daily life, but we want to like look better too. So that's when you built this motor of strength where you can start bringing up your weak points. I want bigger arms. Well, the one way to get bigger arms is to be strong and then start isolating effectively and being progressive with good exercises that fit like your structure, right? So finding some like 2 or 3 bicep exercises that really work for you and just getting strong with them. Same thing, with legs. Maybe your hamstrings are lacking, so you do more RDLs, glute ham raises, right? Calves. It's like, get strong. We want to work some calves in. So then you have a purpose behind it instead of just like running out this program that hits every single muscle group. There isn't really a purpose, nor have you built a good, solid motor of strength from all the basic stuff that you did before. Okay. Just remember like a couple things long term. The NLP, it's not forever. This is another common thing. I've worked with guys who say they're like, oh, I've been doing the starting strength for 5 years. And you're like, that's why you're talking to me, brother. Like, let's get you off it. Let's get you moving, right? So it's a tool to build that base, to help you transition, to help you have a good strength base so you can get on and use that strength in your next training phase and in daily life. Once it stops working, once those lifts bleed out, let's get on. Let's move on to something more sustainable, more adaptable, more tailored to you. Use that strength that you built. Okay. And then remember, the progress is cumulative. I think a lot of lifters, they get a little bit emotional about how everything feels day to day. So, oh, I missed some lift today, or I missed a rep today, or, I didn't feel very good, or this or that. And just have to remember that each session accumulates and it drives the adaptation up over time, right? So that progress matters on like a grander scale than you just being worried about how I performed today. Obviously, you want to get in, you want to kick ass in each training session, but know that there's going to be some bad ones along the way. There's going to be some good ones along the way. And just like that slow, sustainable progress over time is awesome, is what you're looking for. And you don't have to panic if one day your bench press, like it doesn't feel good and you miss a couple reps when you felt like you shouldn't. So then you just repeat the weight the next time with no emotion, and then you continue to progress on up, right? So again, training, it's accumulation of adaptations. Don't put each session on such a pedestal. Okay. So again, remember why we're doing the programs the way we do. This is what I've come up with. We're strength first. We're strength oriented. We want to be efficient with how we do things. When we go to make changes, we want to do the minimum amount, adding a light day, but keeping the rep ranges the same, or moving the weight up a little bit, but keeping everything the same. Okay. We're going to make adjustments as they're needed with a little bit of anticipation. Like on my end, I'm going to see your lifts and it's like, he needs a light day, instead of forcing it to happen. Okay. We want to focus on the long-term outlook of your training and let your training accumulate over time and not get emotional about the session by session thing. We're going to train, again, it's based on kind of your recovery capacity, which is why sometimes I'll move somebody off the NLP into an intermediate split to spread the stress out sooner, because I would rather them get on something more sustainable that they can make long-term progress on versus wearing you out with the NLP and demanding that you add 5 pounds every week, even though you're got way more responsibility than the guy that can just like drink a gallon of milk and eat a Costco pizza every day and sleep. Okay. So again, we want to trust that process, but if you stick with it long enough, you're going to see some crazy, crazy results. Just remember that like 1 pound a week for 52 weeks means a 50-pound PR over the course of a year. It's slow. It's frustrating. It's annoying when you're in the middle of it, but then you look back at it and you're like, holy shit, I just made a ton of progress. That was awesome. Let's keep going. So, okay. Thanks, guys. I will chat with you next time. This was a Loom video instead of the recording, because I sat around on the Zoom for this meeting for about 5 minutes or so and nobody showed up. So I decided I would record it instead so you can view it on your own time. Thanks, guys.